I did a bunch of other things this year. One of them, I went knocking door to door with Mormon missionaries, which was fascinating because Mormons and Orthodox Jews have a lot in common. We're both looked at as bizarre aliens. You know, people are poking and prodding at us. They have a lot of restrictions on their daily life, no caffeine, no alcohol, and I have daily restrictions in my life, whether it's keeping kosher or reciting the prayers every day. So I actually connected a lot with the Mormons. You know, they go out right after high school, so they're like 18, 19 years old. And so we went out, it was me and these two female Mormon missionaries were knocking on people's doors in Gwinnett County. And we went to this one woman's house, and we're sitting at her kitchen table, and it's me and the two missionaries and this woman. And I'm sure the woman's thinking, why did the Mormons bring their accountant? You know, what is he doing here? So, I don't know. I went to Fort Benning this year, which is, I don't know if you know this, Fort Benning has the largest Jewish prayer service of any American military base in the world. In Fort Benning, Georgia. And so I had to go check it out. And it was interesting, Fort Benning is like a United Nations of Faith on Sunday. They have a Wiccan service, a Mormon service, a Muslim service. They have everything at Fort Benning. And so the soldiers can choose whichever service they want to go to. And the biggest service out of everything there was the Jewish service. And I went and I realized half of the people there were not even Jewish. It was all these non-Jews attending the service who were just fascinated with Judaism, and this was their first opportunity to walk into a Jewish chapel. And so for me, it was like they kind of were reverse engineering my own experiment. Here I was looking at their service, and here they were enjoying mine. So it was nice to see it from that perspective, that even these people who I thought had it good all these years were actually interested in my own service. I'll just end with one final story about what I did during this year, and I'll open it up to questions. So at the end of this year, I visited 52 different churches and a bunch of things in between. And I learned something at each place I went to. That's the way the book is organized, is each chapter is a place I visited, and what I learned, even at the wrestling, I learned something, and I came out of it a little better. And so I slowly became a better, more appreciative Jew throughout the year. And so at the end, I felt, okay, I need to do one last thing to kind of, end this year with an exclamation point, just to, to finish it off. And so I also felt a little guilty that I had, so to speak, strayed from the traditions of my father. So what does any good Jewish boy do when he feels guilty? He goes to confession. So the last stop in my church hopping journey was to go to confession. So I spoke to a Catholic friend of mine. His name is Vince, and I said, Vince, can you tell me about confession? And he said, you can't go. Only Catholics can go to confession. Even Baptist, he's like, only Catholics are allowed in there. And then he said to me, but I'll sneak you in. And so I figured, well, if he's going to sneak me in, it'll be on his conscience, and he'll have to confess for that. I'll give a little PS. I've come to find out since the book has been published that the priest that I gave confession to actually gives this book out to his congregants as a present. So he was, even though I tricked him, so to speak, that one day, he doesn't hold it against me. So anyway, so for 2 weeks I'm practicing with Vince, because when you go to confession, you have to say, forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. There's a whole, verbiage that you're supposed to say when you go in there. And so I was nervous because the whole year I had been able to, it was a big room and I could sit in the corner with my notebook, like a fly on the wall, and take notes. But with confession, it was just an audience of one. Not only that, I had to pretend, I'm not an actor, I had to pretend to be a Catholic. So it was very nerve-wracking for me. Is it hot in here? No. So I was practicing with Vince for 2 weeks. We finally get there. We went to Sacred Heart Church in downtown Atlanta. And it was during lunch on a Friday, I think. And there's a long line of people going into confession. And I don't know if you've ever been there, but it's kind of like in an airplane, when someone's in the confession booth, it actually says occupied, like in the restroom. And so finally, it's my turn to go in. I walk in there, and it's really hot. The lights are boiling down on me, and it feels like shag carpeting. It's like 1970s closet or something. And in Sacred Heart, there are two different kinds. You can go to two different sides of the confession booth. You can actually talk to the priest face to face. Or you can go, like what we've seen in television and the movies, you can go like with the graded screen. So I don't have to tell you, obviously I went to the graded screen. And so I go there and I sit down and I say, forgive me, Father, for I have sinned, and I say the whole thing, and I'm like, whew, I did it. And then the priest says to me, what is your sin, my child? And I paused for a second. I'm like, oh, shoot, I totally forgot to come up with a sin. I had been practicing all the language and all the formula of what I was supposed to say. I totally forgot that I was actually supposed to do something in there. And so I'm racking my brain. Lust, gluttony, something, say something. And finally, I calm down, and I say, well, Father, the truth is, my sin is that I've been feeling distant from my faith. And which is true. I didn't want to lie to him. He probably assumed I meant Catholicism, but it was true. I was feeling distant from my faith. And so he says to me, well, you should go to services more often. And I'm thinking to myself, go to services more often? I'm going to Baptist, Pentecostal, Episcopal. I'm going to services. Not only that, I didn't stop being Jewish during this year. I went to synagogue on Saturdays and church on Sundays. I'm going to services. But I didn't say that to him. And then he said something else which was very poignant, and it hit home with me. He said, a lot of times we do something even though we don't want to do it. Like we go to the dentist. None of us want to go. Is there any dentists there? None of us want to go to the dentist, but we know we need to go, and we feel better after we go that we took care of that. And he said, similarly, there's a lot of things we do in life that we don't want to do, but they're good for us. And if you go and do them with an open mind, eventually you'll do them because you want to do them. And he was really mimicking a Talmudic phrase that I had learned growing up in Jewish elementary school, which was Shelo Lishma Ba Lishma, which is a Hebrew phrase that means basically if you do things for the wrong reason, eventually you'll come to do them for the right reason. And I had learned this growing up, and here it took decades later for this priest to wake me out of my spiritual slumber and say, just do it. Go to services. Go with an open mind. I was going to services very cynical before this year. And like I said, for me, a synagogue, like I said, I grew up in a synagogue. I compare it to the president's daughters going to the Oval Office. It's not a big deal for the president's daughter to walk into the Oval Office, right? But because she lives there. And for us to walk into the Oval Office, it would be the highlight of our year. We went to the Oval Office. So for me, it was the same thing with the synagogue. I grew up in a synagogue. It wasn't special for me. It wasn't special for me at all. It was literally part of my house. So it kind of took going on this spiritual journey to look outside and say, look at it from a different point of view, from a different angle. This is a house of God. It's a house of worship. Stop being so cynical. This is not your backyard. Go there and appreciate it. And so I took all of this during the course of the year, everything I learned at each church. And really, this book is a love letter to Christians. It's really because they've inspired me to improve myself religiously. And so, I'll just close. Who would have thought hanging out with Jesus would make me a better Jew? So I'll leave it. Hopefully I didn't overspeak, and hopefully we still have time for questions.
Benyamin Cohen is the author of the book, My Jesus Year. Thank you for watching Keynotes on AIB.